Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Nun. I'll have a few words of introduction today. First of all, it's number one, it's quite a difficult sugya today, I will warn you. It's the first thing, and there's a study guide which should be really helpful. Number two, over Pesach, I will not be teaching live. All the shiurim are already recorded, which means it's too late to get in dedication, so sorry about that, if anybody had a particular dedication. We'll be sending out hopefully over the next few days, hopefully Sunday, links to all the shiurim. And then you can learn them at whatever pace you want. You can have them before Pesach. And we'll send out for the whole, we're going to post them all. So it'll be a little confusing to use the site. And the podcast, they'll come up every day as they usually do, but they'll be on the site if you want to access them. Before Monday, they'll be a little out of order. We're going to kind of bury them somewhere and then send you all the links. And then after I teach on Monday, our Pesach, which will be the last day, we'll do Zoom. Then they'll just be up in order. So when you get to the site, you'll kind of see the last one, and then you can just always go back. And there'll be a link. There'll be a page on the site with all the Pesach shiurim and the links. So you could just click on the one you want, and every day's daf will have a link to that place. So you can easily kind of find your way around. I know it makes it a little challenging for those days, but I thought it would be better for people during the holiday that when you do have time to get ahead, you can do that, and makes it easier for people. So even though it might be a little confusing, so that's that. A few other things: Alana Steinhain's Shiur Din and Daf, and Rabbanit Michelle Shiur, which is translated by someone but should go up hopefully today. And both their shiurim are on. Alana's is on Ona'ah, specifically this topic that we're dealing with, and Rabbanit Michelle about what we were talking about, the Mishpat Haran, the power of words, and connects it to Pesach. So her shiurim are done now by another woman from Drisha who will be translating her shiurim into English. Okay, we're going to get started with today's daf. So the beginning part's not so complicated. The second section, it's actually called the Sugyat Tagarei Lud, which comes from the Mishnah, if you remember, the merchants of Lod. So this is their sugya, it's called, because it's a very complicated sugya, so they even gave it a name. So you should just know you're not alone in thinking this is complicated. Okay, what we're going to start with is a quick review of the Mishnah. We have our Mishnah. Our Mishnah talks about ona'ah. That means someone exploits someone else, whether it's the seller or the buyer, pays too much, pays too little. How much is too much or too little? A sixth, according to the rabbis, a third, according to Rabbi Tarfon, which is why the Tagarim, all the merchants, were very happy, because usually the exploitation happens by the seller, and the sellers, therefore, were all happy that he gave a higher percentage, because it sounded like under that, it's all fine. And they were all excited. But then he said, oh, but wait, but you have a lot more time to change your mind. The buyer can complain for a lot longer and get their money back. Now, it's not clear exactly which case he's talking about, and that's something we're going to have to figure out today. And then they said, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. Your shita doesn't, your approach doesn't really help us so much. So today we're going to see 4 different interpretations to what exactly is the machloka between Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis, and why were they happy in the beginning and not happy at the end. And it's all going to come about because of a question they asked. They try to infer it from that line in the Mishnah, and then they say, but that's not necessarily the only way to understand it. And from there, we get to all different interpretations. Before we get there, we're going to review the machloket Rav and Shmuel. How do we calculate? How do we get to that sixth or the third? Right? Do we get to it based on, is it a third of, this is classic in the Gemara, they want to figure out how do we calculate this percentage? Is it a third of the price, the actual market price? The market price is supposed to be X, and then it's a sixth of X, and that's ona'ah. Or is it either that, or it can also be ona'ah if it's a sixth based on the price you paid for it. And if you veer from a sixth, if the actual price is a sixth less or a sixth more, then you can claim it was ona'ah. We can use the word exploitation. Okay, that was exploitation. So Shmuel said it could be either or. And then we tried to prove Shmuel from the Mishnah. We tried to prove it in one way last time, because we said it said 4 out of 24, and they assumed 4 out of 24 meant 20 out of 24. And then they said 20 out of 24. In the end, they kind of said would have to, right? They first thought, oh, 20 out of 24. What do you see? Well, the price is 20. You charge for 24, well, then it goes on, right? The market price actually is 20, and 24 is not 1/6 is less than 1/6 of a difference from 20. So then they say, no, it could be, it's the seller. They say it can't be the seller because it says in the Mishnah, the continuation was talking about the buyer. That it was priced at 24 and you sold it for 20. But then they said, who says it's 20? It never said 20. And the Mishnah could be 28. And then the price is 24 and 1/6 more was 28. And then that could fit with Rav or Shmuel and it doesn't prove anything. We're going to do the exact same thing with the second part of the Mishnah with Rabbi Tarfon and the third, because it says the same idea, 8 out of 24. And we're going to assume 8 means it was 16, 24, and then we're going to have all the same problems as before. So let's start with Tnan, Horet, Rabbi Tarfon. We're about 8 lines from the bottom of Mem Ten Amud Bet. Horet, Rabbi Tarfon belot. Ha'ona'ah, shmonav kesef me'esrim va'arba'a kesef l'sela. It's 8 out of 24. Shlish lemekach, a third. My lav dezabin, shave shitzere, be'esrim va'arba'a. Is it not the case where you sold something worth 16 for 24? Now let's just do the percentage. If you base the percentage on 16, it's 50% more, right? Not a 6 more. So if it was shitzere b'esrim va'arba'a, right? Because then you're adding 8 more. That's a half. Ushmamina shlish ma'ot. I'm sorry, it's a half and not a third, right? Ushmamina shlish ma'ot nami shaninu. So from there, it must be that you can also calculate it based on the price you paid, which would be Shmuel. 24, a third of 24 is 8. Oh, you veered 8. There you have it. Lo, they say, who's to say that? Just reverse it. Maybe it was worth 24 and you sold it for 18, and then you would have undercharged, right? You were underpaid. You were the seller who was underpaid. So they say, wait, but then mimin danem mocher, but Rabbi Tarfon continues and says, Amar lahem kol hayom mutar lachzor. They can change their mind all day long. They have all day to change their minds. Now, Amar Rav Nachman had said about this line, the person who has the rights to change their mind to the end of the day is the buyer. But the seller can always, they don't have any time limit. So then you can't say it's talking about the seller being exploited. It must be the buyer, in which case it can't be something 24 sold for 16. That certainly helps the buyer, not hurts the buyer. So Ela Dezavin, you see this is the exact same structure as the end of yesterday. Ela Dezavin Shave 24 b'tzlat train. So then they resolve it by saying, oh no, this doesn't prove Shmuel, because you could say it was something worth 24. And it was a difference of 8, and it was for the seller because they overcharged 8. It never said in the Mishnah 16. I don't know why they even started thinking it was 16. It must be they sold it for 32. And then it was overcharging of a third calculated from the amount of the actual market price, which would then not prove Shmuel at all, because that works in with Rav beautifully. Okay, so first attempt didn't work, second attempt didn't work, both from our Mishnah. Now let's try a bright, and this actually will work to support Shmuel. Tanya Kavatei de Shmuel. Mishu talalav yado ala elyona ketzad. The one who was messed up by this, okay, that the ona'ah was put on him, he was exploited, has the upper hand. Ketzad. Now, the only part that's important for proving Shmuel is the next few words. But we'll already learn the content, and we're going to see later that this is actually a subject of debate. But this part already proves Shmuel. Ketzad. Machar lo shaveh chamesh b'shesh. If you sold something that's worth 5 and you sold it for 6. Now, again, market price is 5. So if you veered 1, that's 1/5. That's not 1/6. But we're going to see that this is ona'ah. And that's because you can also calculate it based on the price you spent, which is you spent 6 and you paid 1 too many. So that's 1/6. Okay, and that proves Shmuel. We're done proving Shmuel, but let's learn the content of the Breita. The topic there is not, this isn't the important part of the Breita. The important part of the Breita is the details, which is, okay, so obviously in this case, it was the buyer who was messed up because they had to pay 1 more than they were supposed to. So therefore, yad lokach ela elyona, the buyer has the upper hand, which means what? We're going to see, this is what I said before. This is a subject of debate later. It's not clear that this is the case, but this Breita clearly holds this way. If you're at ona'ah, ratza omer lo ten li ma'utai o ten li ma she'onitani. The buyer, or the one who was exploited, we'll see in a minute, it could be the seller as well. We'll give an example with the seller. Same thing, just flipped. Has the rights to either, when you're at ona'ah, that 1/6, you can either say, I want my money back. I don't want to go ahead with the sale at all. Or you can say, oh, I overpaid by 1, give me back my 1 and keep the deal going. Okay, that's what you can do at ona'ah according to this Breita. Machar lo shaveh shesh b'chamesh. What if he sold an item that was worth 6 and he sold it for 5? This is where the buyer is the one who exploits the seller and pays him too little. Minitane. In this case, by the way, it would match Rav and Shmuel, but already since the first case matches Shmuel, right? This whole braita therefore is used as a proof for Shmuel. But anyway, minitane mocher, and therefore yab mocher la'elyona. The seller has the upper hand. What does that mean? Ratza omer lo teni mikli. You could say, I want my item back. I don't want to sell it to you anymore. Oh, and therefore I'll give you your money back. Oh, teni masho nitani, or pay me one more because you didn't pay me the right amount. And let's keep the sale. So basically, according to this braita, you could keep the sale going. But again, the whole point of the braita was those few words, machar lo shaveh chamesh b'shesh, which shows Shmuel, because that's only 1/5 if you do it by the market price. That was the easy part. Now we're going to get to the complicated part. So now we have a question. I'm going to pull up the study guide. I think it will be useful here. Let's go to the study guide. Okay, so the first part I showed all the proofs and all that. Now we're going to get to this question. When you're at less than a 6th, so again, let's just review our options. We have a 6th. At a 6th, we just learned that you have the option to kind of either undo the whole transaction or keep the transaction going and just get your money back that you were exploited. At more than, we call it bitomeka. You can cancel the entire sale beyond that. Beyond a 6th, if you've done more than a 6th, like let's say you take 50% more, so you get overcharged by 50%, the whole deal is off. At under, what happens? That's our question right now. Less than a 6th, we call this before mechila. What does mechila mean? Well, the person doesn't really care. Oh, I just realized that I did say today's dedication because I had so many announcements in the beginning. So I'm really sorry. I'm going to stop Shiur and say the dedication. Just dawned on me. And apologies because it should have gone in yesterday. So, Lal, I apologize to Ricky. Today's stuff is sponsored by Ricky and Alan Zibit in loving memory of Frida Carlin, Fredo Bat Meir Zichrona Levracha, on her 9th year at site, which was yesterday, and in honor of the birthday of their son, Elon Yitzchak. Mom, we celebrate your gentleness, fierce love of family, and strong moral code, which your grandson has inherited. So now we're going to go back to our Gemara. So the question is this. At less than a 6th, what happens? At less than a 6th, according to the rabbis, la'alter havi mechila? Does that mean, so what does mechila mean? Mechila means that we assume anyone is willing to pay a little bit more. So therefore, it's a done deal. Does that mean it's a done deal no matter what? In other words, immediately you pay that money, you can't claim anything. That's what we assume, right? But now they say, or maybe, maybe you also have an opportunity to change your mind within that time frame that we talked about before, about until you can go home, find out, or speak to another merchant, find out that you overpaid, and then you can change your mind about it and get your money back. Now, if you say that, well then, what's the difference between ona'ah and not ona'ah? If both, when you're at a 6th and under a 6th, you could go back and say, hey, I overpaid, give me my money back. Well, then what's the difference between them? Oh, I'll tell you the difference. There is a difference. What did we just say? If you're at ona'ah, you have 2 possibilities in front of you. You could get your extra money back that you overpaid, or you can you can cancel the sale entirely. At less than a 6th, you only have one possibility. At less than a 6th, you can get your extra money back. I paid 8 for something that was worth 7. Okay, so I was over by a 7th. Okay, in that case, if I want to say, hey, listen, I overpaid, I can get my money back, but I can't say, oh, I don't want to buy from you. I want this deal canceled. I'm not even interested anymore in this item. And at ona'ah, I can. So then the Gemara says, mine. So we're left with these 2 possibilities, and this is what we're going to try to establish. When you're, again, the case of 7 and 8, okay, where it's a 7th difference, okay, or an 8th difference, or a 9th, or a 10th, or whatever it is, where you overpaid by less than the ona'ah amount, Do we say it's a done deal? You can't get anything back, which is what we thought. Or do we say, no, you still can complain within that same time frame. It's just that you don't have a possibility to cancel the transaction. Your only possibility is to get your money back, your extra money back. Okay, that's the two options. So now they're going to go to the Gemara, and they're basically going to talk about the Mishnah. I'm sorry. The Mishnah had said, if you remember, Rabbi Tarfon comes along and says it's a third, not a sixth. And then, you remember, the merchants were all excited. And then they said, oh, you know what? You're not really helping us, when they heard that he said, Kol hayom. So now we have to figure out, does that work better with one possibility or the other? And to figure that out, they're going to make a certain assumption, which later we'll challenge. But right now, they're going to start with a certain assumption. So Tashma, let's try to get to an answer to our question of, again, under a 6, do we assume it's mechila automatically and there's nothing to do anymore? Or do we say the buyer or seller, but let's just go with the buyer, still has a chance to try to get back the extra money they overpaid, even under a 6? So Tashma, Hazru l'divrei chachamim. So now we're going to focus on the fact that, again, the merchants first were very happy with Rabbi Tarfon, and then they said, you know what, the rabbis are better for us. Savruha. Now, Savruha means they thought. Now, who's they? In this case, it's the people, the rabbis, who were bringing this as a way to answer the question. We're going to say that they assumed a certain assumption, which later we're going to challenge, which is what? Mishlish l'Rabbi Tarfon kepachat mishtut l'Rabbanan dami. A shlish to Rabbi Tarfon, to less than a shlish, right, is like a shtut and less than a shtut of Rabbanan, meaning, okay, they assumed that when the rabbis, and this is what we assumed also, when the rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Tarfon, or Rabbi Tarfon came and disagreed with the rabbis and said it's a third and not a 6, that basically whatever the rabbis say for a 6 is what Rabbi Tarfon says for a third. And then we're going to see the following. Okay, and then basically less than will be the same also. Okay, that whatever they said will be parallel. So we'll see as we play this out. So Iyamar Bishlam is a structure where we're going to say, if we try this option, it works. And if we try the other option to answer our question, it doesn't work. So remember, we had two options. Either you buy it and it's immediately mechila, or you buy it and you still have an option to say, oh, I overpaid at under a 6. So now we're going to say that option 2 seems to work better. That's in the words, if you say it's going to work, okay, meaning if you say the following, it will work, bishlama, which is, I'm repeating the words, less than a 6 to the rabbis is you still have an option, and then if we say that whatever the rabbis say, Rabbi Tarfon is going to say the parallel, which means the Rabbi Tarfon will say, Rabbi Tarfon, kol hayom. Now, Rabbi Tarfon, we're going to say less than a 6, less than a third. Okay, that's what's in this chart. Anything less than a third, according to Rabbi Tarfon, is not ona'ah, which means it's not exploitation, which means we assume the buyer, right, is mechila. But in this interpretation, we don't assume the buyer has mechila. We give the buyer the same time we have for ona'ah, we give the buyer here. Well, what did Rabbi Tarfon say about ona'ah? You have all day to complain, not just till you go show the merchant or your friends or your relatives. No, you actually have all day. So less than a 6, you can be mochel all day long. So now, as opposed to the rabbis who say either, right, or ona'ah kedei shireh. So now, in the beginning, they said, okay, from shtut to shlish, okay? Now, the Gemara doesn't explain this all. That's why you have to explain it outside. And I wrote it in the bottom of the chart here. I explained it. I kind of spelled it out. And the chart highlights the ones that are important to us. Now, at the beginning, they looked at from a 6 to a third, right? Remember, at a 6, the rabbis have ona'ah. More than that, they say bitul mekach. Bitul mekach means the whole thing is canceled. Now, that's bad for the seller because basically at a 6, above a 6, the mekach is going to be canceled. Look at Rabbi Tarfon there. Rabbi Tarfon says, mechila kol hayom. Mechila again. What does mechila mean? Mechila means the sale is good. Well, what do the buyers want? The buyers obviously want a good sale. So from a 6 to a third, the rabbis say it's canceled. It's right. The buyer can always come and say, I don't want this deal. And Rabbi Tarfon says, no, it's a good deal, unless what though? According to this interpretation, unless they complain. Now, how much time do they have to complain? Well, if we say that they could still complain and get their money back all day, well, then in the end, they realize Rabbi Tarfon doesn't help us, because less than a shlish, you can claim ona'ah, you can claim you were overcharged all day long, starting from a little bit, right? 1/12, you can complain, and you have all day to complain. And then they realized that Rabbi Tarfon is way worse than the rabbis, because the rabbis, up until a 6, only give you b'chtei shira el tagar, right? And perhaps even we'll get there later, even maybe bitul mekach is limited in time. But Rabbi Tarfon gives you mechila all day from 0 till a third. That's a huge amount of options. So that's why in the end, they reject Rabbi Tarfon. That fits very well. But let's try to plug in the other option. If you say, Ela Iamart, I'm back in the Gemara, the last line of Daf Nun, Pacho of Nun Amud Aleph, Pacho mishtut Rabbanan la'alter have mechila. But if you say less than a 6 for the rabbis is automatic mechila, that means this deal goes through no matter what. You cannot complain. You paid less than a 6 of overcharging. I overcharged you. Tough luck. There's nothing you could do. Well, then, Rabbi Tarfon nami la'alter have mechila. And if we assume that whatever the rabbis say for under a 6 is what Rabbi Tarfon says for under a third, there's no way they would ever reject Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is great for them. Why is that? Because on my chazru, why would they ever go against Rabbi Tarfon? But the Rabbi Tarfon nichalei tfei. Demai de Rabbanan kavashavelu ona'ah le Rabbi Tarfon havi mechila. Look, from 0, right? Okay, so from 0 to a 6, they both agree. It's immediate mechila. The deal is done. But from a 6 to a third, the rabbis say there's ona'ah, there's bitul mekach, you can complain, get your money back, all that. Rabbi Tarfon says it's immediate mechila. Only at a third they're going to say it's ona'ah, you have all day, but that's right. Basically, Rabbi Tarfon gave them a huge amount of leeway here, where the buyer is going to win out from 0 till a third, basically. Or from a 6 to a third, really, is the difference between the rabbis and Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is going to say the sale is valid no matter what. There's no way to complain and get any money back. And the rabbis say it's bitul mekach. That's a huge difference, and there's no way they would reject Rabbi Tarfon. So it can't be right now, is what they're saying, that the rabbis think that immediately there's mechila. Okay, and again, I'm just going to repeat this in some other words so it's very clear. Let's go back to our question. We wanted to know if at less than a 6 to the rabbis, do you still have that small window, to say, I don't want to spend the money on, I was overcharged, give me back the extra money? Or do we assume the sale is a good sale no matter what? Now, we kind of thought yesterday that, of course it's a good sale. Like, that's the whole thing. You can start complaining. Less than that, you can't. But now they try to prove from the Mishnah by assuming, again, this is the big point because we're going to reject this in a minute, by assuming that when the rabbis and Rabbi Tarfon disagree about a third of 6, their disagreement is just about what percentage, but everything else they agree about, which means, and whatever the rabbis say for a 6, Rabbi Tarfon will say for a third. So if the rabbis say at less than a 6, there's immediate mechila, then Rabbi Tarfon will say at less than a third, there's immediate mechila, in which case there's no way that the merchants of Lod would have left Rabbi Tarfon's opinion, because it certainly favors them with that interpretation. So it must be the first interpretation, that when there's under a 6, we're still going to have, an option to complain, okay, and get our money back. Now the Gemara says, what do you mean? Why do you assume that? And now we're basically going to say, I don't know why you think that that's the case. And in fact, you misunderstood Rabbi Tarfon. We're going to have one way of reading it, and then we're going to actually bring a different way. We're going to bring a difficulty with this reading. We're going to bring an alternative way. And in the end, we're not going to have a way to answer this question that we originally asked. So they say the following. Who's to say that Rabbi Tarfon is, just disagrees about the 6 and the 3, right? Is it 1/6 or 1/3? but but the whole structure is all the same. No. Mishtut va'ad shlish l'Rabbi Tarfon kishtut atzma l'Rabbanan dami. Until now, what did we say? And this is, I specifically reviewed at the end of yesterday's daf. Until now, we've been saying that when you have ona'ah is exactly at a 6. Less than that, we say the mekach is, right? The mekach is good, except unless we just said now maybe there's an option to change your mind about it. At more than but again, even if we say there's a way to change your mind, I'm just reviewing what we learned today. Even if you still have that window, what's the difference between that and ona'ah then? You can get your extra money back, but you can't claim the sale is canceled, right? You can't cancel the sale based on a little bit of overcharging. At bittul mekach, right? Beyond a 6th, anything above a 6th, okay? Already that 1 over 6.2, right? Anything it was 6. You paid 7. If you paid, right, anything more than that, you paid 7.2. You're already beyond ona'ah. And that's already the world of bittul mekach. For sure, the mekach can be canceled. Okay? And again, we'll see some details of that later. Do you have whenever you want? You can do it tomorrow, 3 days later, 5 weeks later. Is there no time limit on that? Or is that also limited by time? But it's still, you can cancel the whole deal easily. Now, what we said is the rabbis were at a 6, and we thought that Rabbi Tarfon just moved that over to exactly a 3rd. Now we're going to say no. Rabbi Tarfon thinks that the laws of ona'ah, where you have these two possibilities, I can either get my money back or I can claim the sale is off, is a range between a 6th and a 3rd. Okay, right now we're going to think it means from a 6, like at a 6, they agree with the rabbis. It's just the rabbis say beyond the 6 is bittul mekach, and Rabbi Tarfon says beyond the 6 up until a 3rd is all ona'ah, and beyond the 3rd becomes bittul mekach. Okay, so that's what we're going to say right now. Okay, how does this change things? Because then we're going to say the following, and then how can we explain it? And then we can still claim what we thought we couldn't claim, which is there's immediate mechila before that. I'm sorry, there isn't immediate mechila. You still have that range of time. Before that, we're now going to say, no, this works, and that we all did by process of elimination, because we couldn't explain the case with the mechila al alter. If there's mechila for under a 3rd, then Rabbi Tarfon is super great for the merchants. But now we're going to say, no, he's not super great for the merchants, because even if he says mechila immediately, that's only under a 6, and on that he agrees with the rabbis, that anything under a 6 is for sure a sale. Can't ever complain. But from a 6 to a 3rd, there's ona'ah. Only at a 3rd, there's bittul mekach. So now let's go through. In the beginning, what did they say? In the beginning, because again, you have to explain according to every stage. Every time we explain this, you're going to have to explain why did they think Rabbi Tarfon was good for them, and why did they change their mind? So they thought Rabbi Tarfon was good because look, from a 3rd to a 6 to a 3rd, the rabbis say bittul mekach, and Rabbi Tarfon says ona'ah. So that looks like, what does it look like? The rabbis are worse for the merchants because their sales are canceled at above a 6. And Rabbi Tarfon says, no, the guy can, it's possible he could cancel it, but also he could just say, I just want the extra money. But then they realized that less than a shlish, right, from a 6 to a shlish, you can claim ona'ah all day long. That's way worse, because now we're going to have to assume here, right, that in other words, 1 second, at less than a shlish, right, at a 6, it's really here, it's at a 6, less than a, right, I wrote less than a 3rd, what I really mean is at a 6. Look at the difference between them, and that's what I highlighted here. At a 6, Rabbi Tarfon's way worse, because at a 6, they both agree there's ona'ah, because remember, Rabbi Tarfon overlaps with the rabbis and takes the rabbis even farther, right? It says ona'ah is a range. But at a 6, the rabbi said, ona'ah b'chdei sheyera'eh. You only have this small window. And Rabbi Tarfon says there's ona'ah, claims can go all day. So at a 6, they're basically going to, Rabbi Tarfon's going to be worse for the merchants. And that's why in the end, they rejected Rabbi Tarfon. Okay, now the Gemara goes and says, wait a minute. this is a little bit of a difficult understanding because what? Now, this is a little bit tricky to understand because you have to know something that's going to come later today. Later today, we're going to have a whole question. The question is going to be, Bitul Mekach, okay, we haven't gotten to this. Bitul Mekach, is it also limited in time? Okay, I mentioned it before. Is it limited also to the same time limitations, all day to Rabbi Tarfon and according to the rabbis, just to show your local merchant or your relative? Or is Bitul Mekach forever allowed? Now, what they're going to say is there's a question about it and there's no clear answer. So if there's no clear answer, now they say if we go with our reading right now that we suggested to basically reject our answer from before, we tried to say it was obvious that there's mechila bichdei she'ereh, that there is a time limit under a 6 that the rabbis would allow. We say, no, that's not true, because we can reread the sugya and understand it differently. But if we read the sugya this way, the only way it makes sense is if you assume that Bitul Mekach is allowed forever. And then we would have an easy answer to the question that we're going to later ask. So the fact that we don't have an easy answer means this must not be the interpretation. That's the approach. It's a little bit complicated, but it's something the Gemara uses a bunch of times. It's a method used that if we're going to later have a question and it's not clear what the answer is, and this reading would have a very clear answer, this obviously isn't a correct reading. So let's figure out with all that background now, let's understand why not. So now they're going to say, Ihachi, if you're going to read it this way, B'mai samchu me'ikara. Why were they happy in the beginning? Actually, the only reason they'd be happy in the beginning would be tifsho. We should have an answer then to this question. To Bitul Mekach. Now, what did we think in the beginning? Why were they happy? Because the rabbi said there's Bitul Mekach, and Rabbi Tarfon said there's ona'ah from a 6 to a 3rd, remember? And Bitul Mekach is obviously worse than ona'ah. Well, it's only worse if what? If Bitul Mekach is not limited in time. If Bitul Mekach is limited in time and the limitation of the rabbis is always less than Rabbi Tarfon, right? He's going to give a very small window, then that's actually better. Bitul Mekach, okay, let's just say it very simply. Bitul Mekach I'm just going to give it a time, like an hour, till you go show your friends and all that. Bitul Mekach for an hour, that they have 1 hour to come back and say, oh, you overcharged me and I'm canceling this deal, is actually better for the merchants than if they could claim ona'ah all day long. If all day long they have the possibility to come back and say, either you overcharged me and I want the extra money back, or I want to cancel the deal, that's actually worse for the merchants. So basically what they're going to say is, you would have to say here, the only way that this would work, that they were happy in the beginning with Rabbi Tarfon, was to Bitul Mekach Rabbanan la'olam chozel. That Bitul Mekach must be able to happen forever. There's no time limitation, because to Kevan de Amar Luhu Rabbi Tarfon Havia ona'ah samchu. Because then when Rabbi Tarfon says no, there's no Bitul Mekach, there's ona'ah, they were so happy because ona'ah is limited in time. Even if it's limited in time and you still have all day, that's way better than Bitul Mekach, which is forever. And therefore, Ki Amar Luhu Kol Hayom Chazru. But then when he said to them all day, they said, oh wait, but that's not good at a 6. Now, right? In other words, just remember, what they were happy about at first was from a 6 to a 3rd, right? From beyond a 6 to a 3rd. But what they ultimately accepted the rabbis was because at a 6, the rabbis were better, because the rabbis gave you much less time to change your mind. So that all makes sense. But Isal Kadata to Bitul Mekach l'Rabbanan b'chdei she'ereh tagaru l'krovo b'mai samchu. But if you say the Bitul Mekach to the rabbis is all day long, is forever, then there's no way they would have, right? There's no way that they would have gone with, one second. If you say Bitul Mekach is limited, if Bitul Mekach was only this 1 hour slot, then b'mai samchu, then they never would have accepted Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon's actually way worse, because Rabbi Tarfon gives them all day. So they never would have been happy with him in the first place. So this interpretation doesn't really work. To which the Gemara is going to answer, and then, okay, now let's just think about it. Where are we in the sugya? If this interpretation doesn't work, then we're back to square one, and we can basically say, based on the fact that they chazru l'divrei chachamim, proves the reading that in our question, Ibaylu pacham mishtut l'Rabbanan, would be b'chdei shiur ele tagaru l'krovo, right? That you're basically limited in you do have an option to complain about the overcharging, even if it's less than a 6, okay? Because that's what we said in the first reading. Now we're rejecting the first reading and saying, no, that's not the case. But now we're going to reinstitute the second reading and say, no, this alternative reading that we have right now, where we said that it's not that the 1/6 and the 1/3 are parallel, it's that Rabbi Tarfon agrees with the rabbis from 1/6, right? They say, at 1/6, we agree that there's ona'ah. It's just that we think ona'ah is a range from 1/6 to 1/3. And then we explained this, but then we had a problem that wouldn't work because Bittul Mekach, we'd have a very clear answer according to this. There's no way they would have been happy if Bittul Mekach, according to the rabbis, was limited in time, which means that Bittul Mekach would have to have a no time limit, but that's not the case because we asked that question later. We don't have an answer to that question. So how are they going to explain that? No. The whole problem there was, how would they be happy if Bittul Mekach was limited? So now they're going to change one minor thing, and that's going to change the whole thing and then will give us an explanation. And this is the last part of this very complicated sugya about why you could still explain that Rabbi Tarfon gave a range. You could then explain that Bittul Mekach could be limited in time. There's a way to read it that way. And it would still make sense that they were happy in the beginning and then change their mind in the end. So let's, without more intro to it, let's read it. So the answer is, Samchu b'shtut atzma. Now we're going to change one thing. We said that Rabbi Tarfon gave a range, 1/6 to 1/3. Okay, and I should have written this a little more clearly here, but we're now going to say that at 1/6 exactly, okay, you pay 7 for something worth 6. They disagree. It's from 1/6 to 1/3, Rabbi Tarfon will say, from above 1/6 to 1/3, at 7.1, you pay 7 and change, already then there's ona'ah. But at did I say that right? No, it would be the no, it would be the opposite. It would be at, right, 1/3 of 6 is, yeah, no, that would be right. Okay. So now we're going to say the following. In the beginning, okay, how are we going to explain this? Rabbi Tarfon mechila l'Rabbanan ona'ah. At exactly a 6, Rabbi Tarfon still views that as, oh, that's mechila. If you pay 7 for an item worth 6, you don't care. People are willing to do that. And that's why when they saw that, the Tagarim, the merchant said, oh, that's great. And now we're going to explain this again. I put it as mechila la'alter. You could really explain it both ways, but this is rejecting the first interpretation that you couldn't read this sugya as immediate mechila, which again is going to mean that we don't have an answer to our question. So let's assume we're going to try to read this as anything under a 6 to the rabbis is immediate, right? It's a done deal. And that's why the merchants were very happy with Rabbi Tarfon, because he said at 1/6 exactly, there's mechila, right? So it's a good deal. So therefore they were very happy. They could charge their 7 and get away with it. And that's why they went with Rabbi Tarfon. But then, and then what's the deal? Rabbi Tarfon says, but anything above that, 7.2, 7.1, already that's ona'ah. And ona'ah is all day long. And the rabbis would say, oh no, that's Bittul Mekach, but you only have b'chdei she'yer et. And then they said, oh, wait a minute. We don't want Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon, between a 6th and a 3rd, gives everybody all day long. But the rabbis, even though they say Bittul Mekach, which sounds more severe, but if it's b'chdei she'yer et, if it's limited in time, then that's good for us, because who's going to complain within an hour, right? It's going to limit the amount of time people will complain, and therefore it's better for us. So now we've explained it in a way, right, by making this distinction of exactly at a 6 they argue, that would explain why they were happy. But a 6 to a 3rd, actually Rabbi Tarfon is more strict with the merchants, or bad for the merchants. And that's why in the end they changed their mind. So in the end, we don't have an answer to our question. We don't really know what happens under a 6th, or it's not that we don't know, because we're going to see it soon, we're going to actually rule on it, but we don't have a way to learn it from the Mishnah. We thought that we could get to an answer from the Mishnah. In the end, we can't. So now that was the complicated part of our sugya, which is to try to figure out from the Tagarei load, could we figure out what exactly happens at under a 6 according to the rabbis, and in the end, we couldn't really figure that out. Now we have another question. The structure of the way they ask the question, luckily the whole answer won't be as complicated, but the structure is very similar. Same type question, but now on the Bitul Mekach, right? Because again, let's just think about it. The Mishnah gave us, if you want to really have a good context of what we did here, the Mishnah gave us a time limitation on ona'ah. They said ona'ah, we have a machloket. Is it b'chdei shira'eh or is it all day? That was the debate between Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis. They didn't talk about under a 6 or over a 6. So, or over a third, right? So now that's the two questions of the Gemara. Is under, do you have any bit of a time frame? And over, is it immediately just, is it automatically canceled? Or only if you complain, but do you have all your life to complain? Or is it limited in time? So, Bitul Mekach l'Rabbanan l'olam chozel, can you always go back and claim I was exploited? Or maybe it's also limited in time. And then they say the same thing they did before. Well, if you want to say it's limited in time, then we're going to say again, what's the difference between ona'ah and Bitul Mekach then? Because ona'ah is also limited in time. So what's the difference? Right? So what's the difference between a 6 and more than a 6? We asked the same question before. We said mechila is limited in time, then what's the difference between that and ona'ah? And we came up with a difference. So here also we're going to do that. There is a difference. There's a different difference. At ona'ah, exactly at a 6, only the person who was exploited can go back on the deal and say either I don't want the deal or I want just the extra money back. But but if you overcharge by more than a 6, it's such a bad deal that any side can renege. And why would you if you exploit the other person? Well, maybe you want your item back. So you can just get your item back no matter what. Both sides can. So that's because Bitul Mekach means really, right? It's like what we call a Mekach Ta'ud. It was a bad sale. So that was just explaining the question and the ramifications of one of the answers and why it could still, you might have thought, well, then there's no difference between them. And obviously then it's not an option, but no, there could be. Anyway, Tashma, let's try to learn from here. Again, chazru l'divrei chachamim. Okay, so from the fact that they go back to what the rabbi said. So Iyamar bishlama, let's just pull it up again. Iyamar bishlama, this one's going to work. Bitul Mekach l'Rabbanan is b'chdei shira ele tagar l'krovo, u'leRabbi Tarfon kol hayom. Now, if you say Bitul Mekach, according to the rabbis, is limited in time, and Rabbi Tarfon kol hayom, well, that explains why they changed their mind in the end. Because in the end, Rabbi Tarfon, right, against the rabbis, from a 6, it's Bitul Mekach, but you have this time limit, right? It's only for an hour. And Rabbi Tarfon gives you all day. So that makes sense why they didn't want to accept Rabbi Tarfon. But if you say Bitul Mekach l'Rabbanan la'olam chozer or ma'chazru, b'd Rabbi Tarfon nichalei tvei. If the rabbis say from a 6, okay, you don't even really need this anymore, the chart, but from a 6, they already say it's canceled, and you can cancel it, right? You can cancel it forever. Well, if you can cancel it forever, that's really bad for the merchants. From a 6, you can cancel it forever. That's not good. The Rabbi Tarfon's better because what does Rabbi Tarfon say? From a 6 to a third, you can only do it that day. That day actually is better than forever. So the kamash v'le ona'ah kol hayom v'tulo, right? They say you're limited by the day. So that would basically give us the answer. To which they say, oh no, Bitul Mekach lo shachiach. You're talking about the difference between them from over a 6 to a third, and there Rabbi Tarfon's would be better? Not true, because it is true. But that's not the part that concerns them. In the end, what really concerns them is a 6. Why? Because most people don't overcharge more than a 6. So the fact that Rabbi Tarfon is better for them in that case, it's a rare case. More likely, they're going to exploit people at around a 6. And what do the rabbis say? You have just an hour. And Rabbi Tarfon says you have all day. So that's why they left Rabbi Tarfon, because the more common case, here's a whole interesting way of looking at it. It's the more common case that was more of interest to them. While it's true that Rabbi Tarfon in the end was more lenient about the higher amount of exploitation, but that's so rare that that's not a factor. So therefore, again, we don't have an answer to this question. But now, unlike most sugyot, we're going to get into what's the halacha, because we've left open a lot of possibilities here. So I'm a rabbi. And with this, we'll finish for today. Hilchata. Hilchot mishtut nikne mekach. Yoter al shtut bitul mekach. Okay, less than shtut, it's a done deal. There's no going back at all. Okay, there's none of this, oh, maybe you still have time. No, you paid a little more overpaid, tough luck. Yoter al shtut. Okay, first of all, we obviously paskin like the rabbis. It's a 6. More than a 6, it's bitul mekach. Shtut at a 6, kanal machziro na'ah. Now, this is different from where we started. We said at a 6, you can choose. I can cancel the deal or I can get my extra money back. According to the halacha, though, it's a done deal. It's just you could get your money you were exploited by, but you can't cancel the mekach at ona'ah. Not like we saw in the Braita we started with. Vizeh, and both bitul mekach and, okay, here we get an answer to the bitul mekach question. Both bitul mekach and ona'ah is b'chdei she'era ele tagara l'krovo. It's limited in time, even bitul mekach. All you have is that, let's say we call it an hour. Tanya kavate de Rava, and here's a Braita to support Rava. Most people say this Braita really supports just the last line, that we have this time limitation, because there's 2 opinions, and one totally fits with Rava, the second one doesn't, but they do both agree about this time factor. So maybe that's what the proof is here. So here's a Braita to prove Rava, and with this we'll end. Ona'ah pachot mishtut niknei mekach. At ona'ah less than a shtut, this is exactly what Rava said. Yeter al shtut batel, more than that, it's canceled. Shtut at a 6. Kanal machziro na'ah. The sale is good, but you have to return the extra money. Divrei Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Omer, he differs a little from Rava. Yad mocher ala elyonan. And this goes back to the Braita we saw previously. Rotzeh Omer lo ten li mekli, o ten li masha initani. In other words, if the seller, right here, it's not really the seller, it depends what it is, but right, you have the right to basically say, I either want the sale to be canceled or I want to get the extra money back, right? It should be the defrauded party. I have to check that, why it says Yad Mocher here. And I have to just double check that. Yad Mocher she'em biyado mal harot v'limalech eno makir bonato ad shir et talit acher. I'm just looking at Rashi. Okay, I have to check that out for tomorrow. But but both of them are limited in time. Okay, and that's basically proving Rava. Okay, we'll stop here for today. I'll go back and I'll check that mocher part. And let's just quickly, very briefly review what we did. We started with trying to prove Shmuel from the 2 parts of our Mishnah. One was yesterday, one was today. We didn't successfully prove, but then in the end, we did prove Shmuel from this Braita. Then we brought this question, which was the big question that really we dealt with almost the whole Shiur, which is, at less than a 6 of the rabbis, you still have a way to claim I was exploited and I want to get my money back. We tried to say yes, that you have this small time frame, because it was all based on why were the merchants happy in the beginning and then changed their mind, right? That's the complicated part. Why did they think Rabbi Tarfon was good for them and why did they change their mind? And we basically provided 4 possibilities, right? We went through. One we said didn't work, but then we suggested some other possibilities as to how it would work. And then we don't really get an answer to the question because it could be either, yes, there's automatic mechila, or maybe you still have time to complain. We could explain it both ways. And it also affected how we view Rabbi Tarfon. Is a third, does he really mean at a third? Or does he mean a range, either at a 6 to a third or above a 6, right? More than a 6 to a third. But at a 6, he actually disagrees with the rabbis. That was kind of the last reading that we had. And then we asked this other question, is bitul mekach limited in time, which we didn't get to an answer. We again tried to prove from the Mishnah, we're unsuccessful. But then Rava actually said that bitul mekach is limited in time. Okay, and with that, we'll end for today. Wishing everybody a good day and b'sorot tovot.